Good evening and welcome to our weekly podcast. Let's just jump right in. So, unfortunately, one of our members, Molly, is not available to be with us today, but she posed an interesting question in our group chat that I'd like to share with the rest of the team. And the question goes as followed. What are we striving for in communication in today's age within training? And she brought up, Molly, a good point with AI being used in the Oscar film The Brutalist, as the characters are Hungarian and the actors being English and American who are portraying these characters. Adrian Brody actually winning the Oscar for Best Actor. And they used AI to just sharpen the sound of the Hungarian. So if AI now is so advanced, especially in communication and training, what is the goal if we can just put it through an auto tune and just say, we're set? I would love to hear everyone's thoughts about this because I know we're all in some capacity have done some kind of training as teachers in the past. So I would love to hear this group's thoughts on this.
I mean, I just wanted to reference something that my ex boss at Havas, who was the CEO of Havas, a very clever man called David Jones. And I remember when all this technology, this is like 10 years ago, all this technology was coming out, and he wrote a book called, uh, what's it called? Who Cares Wins. And in there, he's talked about people of my age. He's a bit older than me, but people of my age, so I'm nearly 50. People of my age who are Generation X, our education was more similar to that of Henry VIII than the generation that preceded me. My brother's generation, and Molly and Brittany's generation. And the reason he said that was because of these advanced technologies that started with mobile and then have now blistered into AI. People seem to forget they've only been around since about 1995-ish in their full state. So this is all very new to start with. There's hundreds of years that preceded it where people were writing on vellum and using carrier pigeons and all this other stuff. Um, and again, without sounding like a Luddite, I suppose what I'm trying to say is the question I would ask is what's missing when you impose an artificial framework upon training? What is the difference between live theatre and recorded images? It's not better or worse, but I would say, and I know Molly referenced this thing about authenticity as well. Are we losing some of that authenticity just because of the history? Human beings as storytellers around campfires millennia ago. Are we seeing a reduction in people's confidence, proclivity, and ability to communicate in a live setting? And is that a problem? And should we be taking that into consideration in our training? Sorry, there's a lot there, but that's kind of the way my head hit it.
I'm just going to jump in there really quick. I think there's some interesting points there. But doing some editing myself, for years I was just editing on the iMovie, just basic, so incredibly simple, cut, paste, maybe a few edits. But since I've moving on up in the world and editing and doing my own work, I've downloaded one of the later editing tools. And the advancements on this thing is incredible. It's going to take a while to get to fully understand and be fluent in the intricacies of these new things. But what I need to realize, even though I can get lost in the fun of all these new effects and everything, the point of what I'm editing in the films, because they're usually films, is to have a clear beginning, middle, and end in the storytelling, which happens on the day of filming. Not, I mean, yes, in the editing to tell a story, but in the clarity of what you've captured on film. So then I'm thinking, even though these new bells and whistles are coming into formation in my library of knowledge, sometimes I can't get too carried away and be like, well, let's just simplify this again. Sometimes just a cut here and there is just enough to tell the story. You don't need all these extra added effects because then you actually muddle the story. So that's where I'm curious in this question again is even though we have all these new advancements of these technologies and they have all these new bells and whistles, is sitting in a classroom talking to a human being still the most effective? I'm not saying it doesn't need to be revamped because there's look at the car. The car has been revamped. It's been in modern civilization for in the public anyways for over 100 years, and look at the advancements every single year on cars. Now there's computers in cars. 50 years ago, not a chance. um, so I'm not saying sitting in the classroom looking forward is the correct way, but there is, I don't want to lose the simplicity in these things. I don't want to sound like a, like back in my day, this is how we did it and it was the best way, but I think there's something to that simplicity. Brittany, I know you got something going on there.
Mm.
I I mean, I think there's a lot to unpack there. I feel like similarly to how this is a really big topic, I feel like we're showing that as an example as our brains are jumping to a million different places when trying to discuss this one thing because we're suddenly thinking about it in comparison to training, in comparison to education, in comparison to filmmaking, in comparison to performance. Like we've already just tried to apply this question in so many different contexts, and we're just trying to start this conversation. um, I think that it's it's quite fascinating again how something new comes in, and I'm just curious about how the response seems to either be absolutely jump on board, go for it, or absolutely not, never. And I actually feel like I'm kind of in the middle where I feel as though I don't actually have a complete understanding of AI and how it's being used. What I'm more intrigued about, and this relates to what's the question about training, and its potential role in that. What I'm intrigued by is how who in the world is starting AI? Who in the world is creating this and developing it? So therefore, which industries is it starting in? Because then the knowledge sharing and the way that knowledge is being adapted and shared across industry, of course, by the time we're kind of speaking about it right now in relation to theater, performance, filmmaking, acting, television, the way in which it's kind of landing in our hands is a very specific way that I think, from my point of view, is kind of like accidentally did with the intention to produce films, not with the intention like that wasn't, again, I don't know of whoever started this, but going, you know what we could use AI for is this, is for writing
Mm.
content, is for, I'm sure that it came up in other ways, and then as soon as it then exists in our world, we then look at the ways in which we can use it and
Mm.
contextualize it in other ways. So then because of that, I can understand and kind of see what's happening already is that there's a little bit of a disparity between this creation of this new source of something that can be scary but highly useful, but it was created for a particular purpose, and now we're looking at a way of applying it to many other different purposes, which is then making it a little bit more complicated of searching for clarity of what it is. And I think so often, so you mentioned the brutalist, it's like that's the exact same as auto tune that came out years and years ago. And again, same thing. There was obviously a big, strong response to auto tune. But David, you mentioned that it's just they're not the same thing. So is it just that it's something different? Is it just that it's something different that something that is AI created is just going to end up being in its own category? And so yeah, I think already, even just in this conversation, we're ending up in very many different places when trying to talk about this thing because it's so wide reaching. And I think because there's actually a lack of clarity of just how wide and in what way it's reaching all of these different industries. So therefore, we don't even fully know how it's reaching classrooms. So we don't know training. I know the question comes up in universities and schools of if a tutor is reading a paper and they suspect that it's AI, but if they go through Turnitin and some of these other um, databases that exist to try and edit that out and to give you that insight, it doesn't fully exist yet or work yet. And so then how do you manage moving forward? We go, I suspect this, but I don't know if it's true. And then what's that relationship with the student and that conversation? And so, anyways, I feel like it's an area, all this to say, I feel like it's an area that still has a lot of questions. So that's where I stand in this place of going, I don't even have a full formulated opinion yet because I don't know enough about what is going on, what's the intention, what is the potential, how is it going to possibly affect. I'm not that worried in this immediate moment.
Yeah, I mean, I have the privilege, I suppose, of all four of us of having sold AI for an agency. So to give you a bit of context and for people who are listening who may not know, what's called a large language model is where things like ChatGPT and Genesis and the other systems come from. That is like showing you a slice that thick of what AI is possible to do as a tool, where it's about this big. There are so many applications. The one that's hit the public consciousness first is generative content through large language models, which basically trawls the internet for content and through various bots creates basically a content engine. And we have ChatGPT and so on and so forth. The computing power that it creates that it takes and the money that it takes to create something like ChatGPT is proprietary technology, which basically is extraordinarily expensive even for whole corporations. The company called NVIDIA, which is a chipset company, they're driving this because they create a lot of the chips for AI. And obviously things like the space race in Silicon Valley and actually the porn industry is always a first mover in technology, ironically. Those combined have kind of come together and acquiesced around creating something that people at home can use. And that's only happened really just sort of post-pandemic. It started to tip its head forward and people started to go, oh, it's that. But a lot of people think that ChatGPT is AI. And I think it's good to be clear. And you're absolutely right, Brittany. Guided missile systems, there's a whole load of other stuff that it does, thousands of different things that it touches upon. And we're only at the very, very robotics is another one. And then this whole question about consciousness, and you just go off on one again. But you're right, it's a massive subject, and I think for us, we will probably approach it from the point of view of communication because of the context of what we're talking about and these podcasts we're doing, but also, excuse me, what we all do as writers, teachers, communicators, actors, performers. So maybe the lensing for us is that. But you're absolutely right, the applications are vast, and we're only just at the beginning of the journey.
So I got distracted there for a second. I heard my baby crying. So just give me a second to lock back in here for a moment. I think obviously AI is something that is a common thread that we've been talking about for the past couple of podcasts. But let's move away from it for a second and let's go back to the question at hand, which was, I suppose, then what are we striving for in communication in today then? Because it doesn't necessarily always sift itself into AI, but I guess the question that I'm posing is just a bit more related to that question. Is like, what's the point? What's the point in all this? If anything can be, if you can just click something and it's there, then why focus on training at all? I suppose that now, like going back to the brutalist question, we can make that now the comparisons start, right? Okay, so autotune was made in the early 2000s or 90s when it was, or I'm not exactly sure, so I don't paraphrase me on that, but was music better when the Beatles were making it? Did they have to train in a better way to then, was the music more relatable, more real, or is the technology that was auto-tune, did it make the sound more crisp? Is the music better in today? Is it more versatile? Are there more genres because of that? Same with Adrian Brody winning the film. Like, even though it was very slight, the director said it was just a couple of words that were just rounded out for that final sound. But that's only, as David said, that's step one. In a couple of years, are we going to be giving, again, I don't want to get too far away from the AI conversation, but sorry, I want to get away from the AI conversation, but are we going to give awards to computer generated things in a couple of years? If it's like, well, just push the button and then they have this amazing movie, and then the question is, well, is it deserved, or should we go back to giving, even though the sound of the Hungarian might have been a bit not 100% accurate, would the audience first of all care, or would they appreciate that it was like, okay, he's an actor and he's a human being and he did his absolute best. The film is very good, but I don't mind that there's a one syllable missing because that's just part of the craft. Anyways.
Well, I think to try and go to that question of, so then what's the purpose of training? I think we have to be careful of, we can't just go into this hypothetical land of, if you can press a button and then it will, well, that doesn't exist right now. That doesn't exist. If you want to speak to someone face to face, you still have to speak to someone face to face. If you want to, this also being a means of face to face, this is also a means of, it's still a degree of communication within this. I'm saying that if that is what you want. So is the question, what is the purpose of training, or what's the
going back to the question is, what are we striving for in communication?
Just, I know, Brittany, you train people, and Duncan, you do too, and I do, but in a different setting. So I train CEOs and people in communications and not acting. What's very interesting is somebody who's quite physically imposing and went to a very good school, like a design school, whatever it might be, and is a very recent example, not mentioning any names, but what I saw in front of me was someone who was genuinely terrified of standing up in front of a few people in a foreign country and giving a presentation about a subject that he was very well versed in. I saw fear, I saw a lack of confidence, I saw imposter syndrome, and because he was quite tall, what do I do with my arms? So for me, the aim was very clear: get the fear down, make him aware of his ability as a communicator, slow down, all the other things. Your arms, you don't need to do anything with them, just keep them at the side and relax. That's all good. It's very simple stuff, but it was very specific. So to answer the question, what I was looking for, or the purpose or the intention of that, was to give him confidence, courage, authenticity, stillness, good pace, and clarity. I had no computers. I think I had a pen in my hand and him. And we spoke for a while. He presented it a couple of times. And as we well know, after a few goes, you start to relax into it. Before we knew it, by about an hour, he was actually starting to enjoy it. Again, there were no computers, not even no mobiles, or nothing. It was just a marker pen. That was it. And we didn't even use that. It was one human being with another one. I think he did, actually, to be fair. He did have a PowerPoint, but that was fine. But we were talking to one another. And I firmly believe this, will never be replaced by any type of system of whatever kind. Sorry, that's very equivocal of me, but I say that because I've experienced it, because I've done it, and we've all done it. And actually, me and Brittany did it the other day when we were rehearsing a scene. So, yeah, that would be what I had to say.
I think the word striving is really capturing me in this context. And I said, what's striving? Like, what are we always going towards? And I think just clarity of intention. I think that's always like that's always the goal, is to, like, am I being clear enough within my communication? Is my body reacting the same way as my intention is that on purpose, and always being able to have that clarity of thought, and that have that clarity of communication, whether it be verbal or physical. I think is what will never go away, even with the advancements in technology. I think yes, the striving word caught my ear for a moment. Like, what does that actually mean? I mean, I know what it means, but what does that mean in the context of this conversation?
I also, when I hear that, I go, well, it's not about necessarily what we are striving for, but what are the other people striving for? what is it that they need and want when communicating? Because again, depending on who it is and what they're working towards, that could be completely different. I might not be someone who has a hard time standing up in front of a group of people and speaking clearly. I might actually, in my communication, need to work on the listening side of it. It might not be about my diction and clarity and volume and connecting with the audience and reading the room. It might not actually be that. The communication is not just what you're putting out. To communicate has a circle that's continuous. There's receiving on the other end of it. And so I think, again, what are we striving for? We're striving for whatever it is that a person who is curious about communication work and training and whatever their goals and intentions are, of helping them to be able to achieve that. And I think that obviously, depending on the context and who that is, that and who what people's individual habits are and what people's goals are, that could change constantly. Also, depending on the context of what it is that you're working on. I think that the goal is to be able to just help people get to a place that they feel like they can reach those communication goals, and that we can put forward tools and plans and systems in place to help support people to get there, whatever that means. But I just think that there's quite a range of what that could possibly look like for everyone.
I mean, there is a bit of a school of thought that I'm seeing, and again, I'm not going to mention any names. I was slightly disappointed when I found out who said it, but it has been said. Why are we teaching our children Shakespeare? You know, God, what the hell? What are we doing that for? It's old, man. What the hell? For me, that's a bit like saying, well, what's the point of life drawing? If you're going to be an artist, just you know what? You can press a button. Actually, I did it the other day. It's not about the life. Well, it is about the life drawing itself as a skill. Shakespeare in itself is a skill. There is a reason why when you're doing grade 8, you're learning to grade 8 piano, that you have to do scales for 5 years because it takes a while. That skill, that executive skill, takes sweat, tears, lots of striving, lots more tears. We all know that. Is that replaceable with something? And there is a judgment here that I'm making, with something that is a little bit more automatic and a little bit easier to come by. I'm always going to say no, having been someone who was a massive lover of Shakespeare from a little age, and I know I'm in good company here with that, and somebody who's been life drawing for 20 years. And I think it's what it does to your mind and your concentration, your ability to have a clear mind and be articulate, and not all the layers of snobbery and nonsense and elitism. Nothing. It's actually the opposite of that. It's actually anyone can pick up a Shakespeare text and with the right guidance, if they haven't had it before, really be quite compelling with it if they're trained in the right way and whatever. Similarly, anyone can pick up a piece of charcoal. People say, I can't draw. It's like, you can, you just need to learn how to do it. So again, I suppose it's a long way of saying you're absolutely right. It's dependent on what the student's needs are. Some people are too confident and they're too loud and they're too much. And it's like, oh my God, you make my head hurt. Other people, you can't hear a word they say. So you're absolutely right, Brittany, and that's brilliantly observed. It's us looking at them and going, and especially with the now, what is it that they need? How do we make it very specific to their needs and where they want to go on their journey and where they are?
I was just actually, as you said that, David, I had a flashback to when I was interviewed on a news station in Canada years and years ago, because I was walking outside a very popular spot downtown, and I was looking at the Christmas window decorations, and they stopped me and they're like, "Can we interview you?" And it was a conversation about whether Christmas should be up, the decorations should be up before Remembrance Day. And so then there was this big thing about how no Christmas until Remembrance Day. And I only spoke for like 2 seconds on the news, and I said something along the lines of like, well, it's not Christmas's fault. Let's not tear down Christmas. Like, let's ask ourselves, why aren't we raising up Remembrance Day? Why aren't we just putting more effort into Remembrance Day? Because that's just getting surpassed by Christmas. And so it's kind of a similar thing. I think about that before what you just said, of it's like we're we're thinking so much of the mentality of something replacing something else, of it
Yeah.
being one thing or the other thing, as opposed to going, okay, well, let that thing exist, but let's bring up the other thing. Let's bring up the Shakespeare. Let's dial up the life drawings. Let's dial up these things that maybe we feel like they're at risk right now of being eliminated from our world, because I don't think it's a question of whether we will evolve. We will continue to evolve. New tech, new genres, new style, just new things are going to come into play constantly. And so I don't think it's evolving is not a bad thing. It's just looking at if there is something that maybe the voice of that thing is not being heard as much, do we have to actively dial that up as opposed to just tear down this other thing that's coming in as if it's going to be a negative thing? It's not just the Christmas. Bring up Remembrance Day.
Yeah, nice.
And then going back to what you were saying, David, about what we were, am I being heard right now? Sorry. Yes, good. Going back, oh, geez, what am I saying? The striving comment, yes. It's so important because then you have critical thinking skills. And when you have critical thinking skills, societies are more enriched. You have better thinkers, you have better communication, like even within your neighbors, your family, your partners. You have potentially more resources out there. You have a higher connection with your like like with your local community. And I think that's what's missing a little bit in today's age as well. And when you have that clear, better communication, I think your emotions are a bit more under control as well. You don't jump from, because you don't have that clear critical thinking skills, that like, well, I'm angry, then I'm going to act upon those emotions. No, like you have the ability to take a step back, have a critical think with that clear communication. So I think that is also something that's worth continuously striving for in today's age. Is, I think it just, for lack of a better word, makes the world a bit better if you have those critical thinking abilities and more for the mass, not just, again, I don't think it's needs to be an elite ism to have communication skills. I think even at a young age, you can tell your toddler, I'm crying. Okay, why are you crying? And you can have these back and forths, and they feel like, again, what Brittany was saying, they're being received, and they appreciate. They may not know how to communicate back at that moment in time, but they can feel that they're being heard. And I think that's an important part. And then that person that's growing is like, wait, I can be listened to, and my voice matters. And then all of a sudden you give a bit stronger voices to, I mean, I know I'm talking about a toddler in this situation, but to the unheard. I think that's very powerful, is clear communication.
I think one of the things we suffer from in our big conurbations is this lack of emotional availability. And obviously I'm not condoning everyone walking around, floating around with long flowing robes and doing poetry, even though I would love that personally. But I'll give you a quick example from recent history. So this idea, and you're absolutely right, Brittany, again, and both of you, this prejudicial thinking about technology, but also this prejudicial thinking about other people, strangers. And I get it, you need to be careful. But I had an amazing example the other day, and I wrote about it actually. This guy was delivering an Amazon package. It's happened thousands of times, happens a couple of times a day. But this nearly brought me to tears, and it's very interesting. He didn't do anything special. He handed me the thing, how are you, smiled at me, and was on his way. The way he did it, my good Lord, it was the most beautiful smile I've ever seen in my life. He really meant it. And maybe I was at that time, I was feeling a bit mushy. I don't know, whatever it was, but it was genuinely lovely. And he just gave me the package, and he just smiled and beamed at me. He didn't want anything. He wasn't being horrible. He wasn't in a rush. And part of me pinched myself and went, oh my God, I'm a grown man. How lost are we that I'm slightly weepy over this delivery guy And then I thought, no, it's a natural response, this emotional availability. I mean, yes, I was receptive to it, but it was a beautiful moment. What am I trying to say? I suppose what I'm trying to say is I could have sort of scowled, Amazon driver, hurry, quick, let's go. I've got dogs in the house, right? But it wasn't. And it's only because he prompted me and woke me up, actually. I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And I think part of the communication piece in general, regardless of who's in front of you, is this notion of emotional availability and being receptive to, like you said about children. I mean, children are such great teachers because they have that ability to be viscerally aware of everything on so many levels that we seem to shut down from. I see it with my little dogs. They're very similar. They operate on this emotional level, and I think it's a watchword for all of us to have this open-hearted attitude a little bit. And I know it's difficult when you're in amongst 10 million people and on how many people live here.
I was just reflecting as you were speaking there, David, on how earlier I said this, it's not just what we're striving for, it's what people are individually striving for and what they're working towards. And I was just listening to you about you in that situation and you responding to that situation. I just had a thought where I was like, well, yeah, of course it's about the individual and what they're striving for, but sometimes people don't know what it is that they're striving for, or they think that it's one thing and it's something else. So I was just thinking of posing the question to all of us here right now of if we were to take any communication training right now, what is it for each of us? What would we be striving for as the student?
That's fascinating.
Great question.
Give me a second.
I mean, I think I know my answer.
Go. Yeah, I'm thinking about mine. Please share. I don't know what mine is yet. I'm thinking. I've got a notion.
I was thinking about how, as I'm listening to you and thinking about what my response is, I think I have a tendency to respond to people anecdotally. And I was like, I just did that on this call. I just did that where I told the story about me being on the news with Christmas and I know that sometimes obviously responding to people anecdotally can be useful, but then I also ask myself, is this something that's useful and effective in this moment? Or is this something that I like telling stories? I like it. So it's something that, is it serving the purpose of what I'm trying to achieve, or is it serving me? Which, and arguably sometimes serving me is fine. That's fine. That's a bit of what life is. I can make choices that are going to serve myself as well. But then it just makes me reflect on, in particular environments, am I serving that environment in that context, or am I serving myself in that moment? As a means of, if I'm talking with my friends or my family, sure, that's fine. Serving myself, no problem. But in professional environments, is it helping achieve the goal at hand? Or is it actually just, now that habit has kind of creeped over into that professional space, that now I use anecdotes as examples all of the time? And I remember taking an acting class, auditing an acting class years and years ago. And the tutor the entire time only taught in anecdotes, and it drove me insane. And I was like, this is not teaching. This is not teaching. You're talking about yourself and your experience on a film set. And of course, anecdotes are useful when teaching, but they can't be the only tool. And so it's been something that's been in my mind since I saw that.
You just did it again just now, telling a story about not to call you out, but that's funny. Myself, you know what? I think I was reflecting again myself. I relied so much on scripts for what I wanted to say as being trained as an actor, that when I'm in free flow conversation, I feel very comfortable. And when I'm on stage and I have lines and something that I've rehearsed and I can let it go and be present in the moment, I feel fine. But sometimes when I need to be a presenter and and I'm not fully comfortable with the audience, and I'm like, what can I say? What can I do? Like, how can I get? And I get in my head, and I would love that maybe to be a bit more like relaxed in the space, like I would be on stage with the script. And I think that that's part of the communication training, is just being able to rehearse and practice that skill of having that either combination of having that free flowing conversation as I would with like my mates and my friends, just having chit chat where I feel like just can word vomit away, or on stage. And would like to have that relaxation in kind of an off book setting as a presenter. That's what I would go for. David, you're up.
Yeah, it's funny. I was reflecting on what my late father said to me. He said, "The day that you learned to talk, you didn't stop." And I started talking pretty soon. Pretty soon, I started talking. I love talking. I'm very gregarious. But one of the things I think that it's funny just talking about it makes me feel like, oh, I don't know whether I have a level of conceit. I don't even think conceit's the right word. I'm being really harsh on myself. I just assume that I will never be lost for words ever. There'll always be something to say. I hardly ever pause. I don't normally go, it just comes out all the time. It's cool. And it's very interesting. The presumption is that I'm really good at presenting. I'm never lost for words, and my acting's pretty good. And it's very interesting that whole bundle of confidence, I need to work on that and go, how can I elevate it to a level that it's like we did, actually, to be very fair to us on Sunday, Brittany, and I learned so much from that, my own sort of preciousness about it. And I was like, no, just do it. So my lesson would be, how can I just get better and be more present and not take it for granted that I'll always have bullets in the chamber. There might be, and there have been moments where I don't know what to say, not very often. And then with the acting or the performance, just strive to be massively authentic and really, really, really in the moment. Really push the bar on the skill, both presenting and acting, and look at that in great detail and understand it and not take it for granted. It's quite a specific one, because for me it's like, yeah, this is easy. It's like, don't get lost in your ego with it too much. And I'm being very harsh on myself, I think, but I still think it's a lesson for me.
That's very fascinating, David, that you said that, because as Brittany mentioned as well in this conversation of what is a conversation. A conversation is usually, but not always, two people, and there is an aspect of giving, with text or body language, and then a receiver, and then they receive, come up with a thought, and then give it back. But if you're just there, blah 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 blah, monologuing per se, when does it stop becoming a conversation, and when does it start becoming a monologue? And is that, I mean, it is communication, but is it a conversation?
Yeah.
Because then that's so that's that. Yeah, these are our flaws, everyone listening.
Yeah, but I think it's so important, though, isn't it, to be very cognizant that we all have. So I think I gave the example to someone the other day. I can't remember, watching a very famous politician rehearsing, and I'm like, well, if he needs to rehearse, then we all need to do some, because he's an amazing speaker. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's so maybe mine is listening more.
And on that note, we are just roughly at our 40-minute mark, which is where we usually cap these webinars/podcasts. Does anyone have any last comments or remarks that they'd like to say?
Maybe this is another topic for a future chat, but just to be devil's advocate to what David said, I'm always curious of, what does it mean to be authentic? I'm just curious. What does that mean?
What does that mean?
We say it all the time. In actor training, we say things all the time. honesty, authentic, vulnerable. And I just constantly ask those questions of what does that mean? Also, just makes me think of another conversation. I mean, this is specific to acting, but it can come across in presentations and other things, and even many aspects of life. Of, is it important for you to feel a particular way when you're communicating? Or is it more important that the goal of what you're communicating is effectively happening, even if it's not accompanied by the feeling?
Tune in for next week with
Yeah.
our
You'll find
question of
out all about it.
authenticity.